Albert Einstein once said, a person who never made a mistake never tried anything new. And I think this applies to every leader uh, across sectors, really trying every day, one step at a time to change the world. To unravel this very key aspect about the journey of leadership, about the journeys of failure, success, the ideas of trying, but not only in limited to education, but from different sectors and from different themes. We are moving towards our next session, which is all about this entire piece itself. Through this session, we hope to hear our panelists speak about stories of success, failures as leaders, and leadership in their domains. And hopefully, we have something to gather for our education challenge as well. To take this ahead, at 7:30, we will begin the session. And I will invite Rachita from IDEA, who's the co-founder and director at IDEA, to take this forward. A quick introduction for Rachita itself. Like I mentioned, Rachita is the co-founder director of IDEA. Previously, she's led the Dasra Girl Alliance, again, a cross multi-stakeholder platform that sought to improve maternal, adolescent, and child health outcomes in India. She has 15 years experience having led teams in the area of financial inclusion, public health, CSR, and other functions across key aspects such as strategy, business development, and communications. Rachita has an MBA from Judge Business School at Cambridge University and BA in History from Yale University. Thank you so much, Rachita, for accepting to be a moderator to this session. We're very excited to have you with us. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Neeraj. Should I begin or should I wait for a couple of minutes?
We could start, Rachita.
Okay, great. So I think you did an excellent job actually introducing the session with the quote about if you haven't tried any, if you haven't tried anything new, then like, what have you really done? And I recognize that this is the final session of the day. So I thought I'd open on, maybe a slightly lighter note. And I thought I'd start by talking about a tool that's used a lot in stand-up, in comedy actually. It's an improv tool called Yes and. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but essentially the premise of it is if you're on the stage and you're performing an improvisational skit, and the person that you're doing it with takes the skit in a particular direction, the only rule is that you have to go yes and. And what that means is you have to accept the direction it's taken in, and then you have to build upon it. And I think it's so relevant in the context of failure, right? Because oftentimes the inclination is actually to say no, but. But if we were to frame things a little bit differently, then what might we learn? So yes, I couldn't raise enough money this quarter, and I learned what not to do when pitching to CSR. Or yes, my program had to shut down because of COVID, and I pivoted to tech, and that helped me reach an audience that was fivefold the size of my original audience. So the reason this framing, I think, becomes important is because setbacks, challenges, failures, they depend on a range of things, right? They depend on the metrics we ascribe for success. So if we didn't achieve those metrics, does it mean we failed on all counts? No, it just means we failed to achieve those particular metrics. It depends on timeframes. A lot of times, it depends when you measure as well, right? You might go down a certain path and you feel like you're failing, but you stick around and later on, it's a success. And there are so many examples from the commercial world as well as the nonprofit world that are testament to this. And of course, it depends a lot on context as well. And I think sometimes because we tend to discount these other factors, it becomes difficult to acknowledge failures, to reflect upon them, but also very importantly, to embed what we've learned within the culture of our organizations. So today's session is really going to be about that, acknowledging the challenges, I think like Neeraj said at the beginning, along the path of being a leader in this sector. More importantly, reflecting on what we can learn from what happened. And which is why I'm so thrilled to have our speakers here today. And I'd actually like to just take a minute and introduce them. So Dr. Krithi Karanth, it's great to have you here. Dr. Karanth is Chief Conservation Scientist and Director at the Center for Wildlife Studies. She's also adjunct faculty at Duke and National Center for Biological Sciences. She has a PhD from Duke, a master's in environmental science from Yale, and Bachelor of Science and Bachelor of Arts degrees from the University of Florida. And she is not only a scientist. Krithi's conservation and research work has been featured in 3 award-winning BBC series. She's co-produced 4 documentaries, and she's also co-starred with Kevin Peterson in Save This Rhino India by Disney Hotstar and National Geographic. In 2021, she became the first Indian and Asian woman to be chosen for the Wild Innovator Award. Shruti Shibulal is our next panelist. Shruti is CEO and director of Tamara Leisure Experiences. Tamara operates resorts and hotels in South India, focusing on responsible tourism, and has interests in Germany as well. Shruti is a trustee of the Advait Foundation and SD Foundation. These are organizations involved in providing educational opportunities and healthcare assistance to underprivileged sections of society. She's also a trustee of the Women's Education Project, which focuses on educating and uplifting young women from vulnerable backgrounds. Shruti is on the governing board of ATRI, which is a think tank in the space of ecology and environment. In 2019, Shruti launched Satya, which is a hospitality skilling program that enables, again, young people from disadvantaged backgrounds to become employable within the hospitality industry. And last but not least, we have Sundeep Talwar. Sundeep is Chief Marketing Officer of Akshay Patra Foundation. And before joining Akshay Patra, he was associated with Aircel as the National Business Head, driving their mobile banking operations nationally. Before that, he held senior leadership roles with large brands like Bharti Airtel, Motorola, Escotel, which is Idea, and SR Vodafone in India and Africa. Sandeep is a dual postgraduate in management from Duke and IIM Ahmedabad, with more than 26 years of work experience in marketing and communications, with leading corporates, especially in the telecom space. So again, before we begin, I just want to thank and welcome each of you for agreeing to be a part of this conversation on your Thursday evening. But also, I'm really excited about the topic of conversation, right? Because it's not something that we see a lot in the social sector. So to kick us off, Krithi, I'd like to start with you. Can you talk about the journey you have had taking over the reins of a pretty established organization? So can you talk about the circumstances as well as what were the challenges you faced trying to rebuild the organization in a sense?
Thanks, Rachita. Very happy to be here. And I guess we have some Yaleys and Dukies in the room, which is very rare, but happy when I see both of you there. So for me, I've been a conservationist and a scientist for 24 years now, and pretty much no master's program, no PhD program ever trains you to lead or build an organization. You don't have training in management and accounts and HR and any of this other stuff. A series of unexpected events unfolded in 2018 where I had to kind of make a decision to take over and run CWS. And at that point, it was an organization that was founded by my father, Dr. Krithi Karanth, did pioneering work on tigers, elephants, and a whole bunch of incredible conservation successes in India. But the choice was, do you let an org with a 34-year legacy die, or do you kind of pick it up, but refashion it to something else? And so I've, spent the last 3.5 years trying to do this. I still think I'm in very, very early stages of this. And there's been a lot of pluses and minuses along the way. I think one is, first, simply we went into survival mode. The founder didn't believe in having a corpus. He didn't believe in having a building. He didn't believe in any of this, right? So you basically there's 16 staff and less than $100,000 in the bank when you take over, and you just go completely into survival mode. And so that meant working crazy numbers of hours and putting insane number of proposals together, and not really having a senior leadership team that I could kind of lean into and get advice from and consult from. Today is a very different story. 3.5 years later, there are 3 others at CWS, and the 4 of us work very closely together. But the pressure was immense for about 1.5 years just to make sure the org didn't sink. And it wasn't just fundraising, it was everything we did. We suddenly went from working across 17 states in India to be just working in Karnataka. And that's crazy, right? And now we've rebuilt and we're going to focus on the Western Ghats. We've strategically decided that this part of India has, 5% of land, but 30% of India's biological wealth. So we're going to focus on protecting wildlife and working with communities in the Western Ghats. But it took 3.5 years to get here. And for me, a couple of things I've learned along the way. So first, just getting to a point where you can actually put your head out of water and breathe. And then COVID hits. And so all the gains made in the last 3 years, were wiped out again. So I was just like, how much can you run like this? You mentally need to have that agility and that resilience to keep going and not give up. But I think one of the things I feel that I made a mistake on and perhaps could improve is that in this pressure to kind of build the org, forgot to spend too much time with people. So when I write my emails, when I call people, they're abruptly short, and all the people who know me laugh about it. They know why, the context of it, but somebody coming in and trying to build a relationship with you, and you're just writing these 3-word emails and very short messages, and it's the tone of it is taken wrongly, even though you don't mean intent. So slowing down, spending time with people who you're trying to build the org is something I really prioritize now, because that's, in the end, the org is made up of the people that work there, right? So there were hits and misses. We've hired people, we've had people leave, we've let go people, and I think really gotten to a point where not just obsess about the scale of the programs and the funding, but also the quality of people we bring into the org. And been very conscious of this. We have 42% women, but wildlife was a male-dominated field. We're trying to change that, but I think we can do a lot more. So I'll just kind of stop there.
Thanks, Krithi. I think one of the things you said that came out in the way that you were speaking was really about how also being a leader can actually be a really lonely job, right? Particularly in a resource constrained sector where you just have to go, and there are 50,000 things that you're kind of dealing with. And I'd love to go deeper, and maybe I'll come back to you on that in just, how do you make some of those choices, right? Because you're coming in and you're, like you said, you're trying to transform the organization. So you have to make very hard calls. And I know this is something that Shruti and I also spoke about earlier. So perhaps we'll come back to that, but thanks for that, Krithi. Sandeep, I'd actually like to turn to you now. You've worked in the private sector. You've had an entrepreneurial journey as well, and and now you're in a leadership position in one of India's largest nonprofit organizations. So, can you tell us a little bit about what you've learned at times? Perhaps when you were an entrepreneur, and a time when you faced a setback and what you learned from that. And maybe also at Akshay Patra, just given the kind of organization it is and the scale at which it operates, can you talk a little bit about what you might have learned from challenges faced then as well?
Thank you, Rachita. I'm truly inspired by Dr. Krithi. I think it's time to meet her, so I would do that. Thank you for connecting us. So thank you for asking this question. I think with a large corporate career at my end, about 27 years, and being one of the first Indians to make a antivirus software, life had been always a choice which I had, was to do probably define something which I should be known for in this world, because end of the day we are human beings, and as human beings, it's very, very important you keep thinking, why have you taken the birth, and this is something which continues to tinker me every day. After I left the career to pursue as an entrepreneur one point of time, very early in my age, and joined the corporate world in the telecom sector. Right. So this is way back in 2007, if I recall well. I started another stint of being an entrepreneur, right? And then again in the technology space, Rachita. I was the first again Indian to bring in the kiosk in India. Well, I was well trained in Germany that point of time, ensured that the stamp papers are dispensed in the open market, which is right in the center of the garden, which is next to the municipal corporation office, or these kiosks were installed in some of the telecom showrooms to take care of the prepaid recharges and postpaid bill payments. So all was going well. I was trying to establish myself. And I was looking for a venture capitalist. A few months down the line, everything was going well. Suddenly, we all know in 2007 there was a big boom which came in, and so I expected my venture capitalist to invest, but then we all know how the share market operates. Yeah. So he lost heavily, and in a minute he said, "Sundeep, sorry, I can't look at further investments in the organization. Whatever I had invested. Whatever savings I had in my entire career, I had invested." Now, and I fairly remember my daughter's birthday. It was 8th of February. There was a movie called Hum Tum. So we decided to not throw a party because at that point of time I could not afford not having much of money. So I took her for this movie called Hum Tum. So when we came out of the movie, and I know how many of you remember, this was the Saif Ali Khan was a racer, and so he lost all the money at one point of time, and his daughter said, "Father, we become poor," and so on. So for my daughter, when she came out of the mall, which we had seen the movie, she wanted to buy a teddy bear, and a large teddy bear, and it was not affordable for me at that point of time. So I told Beta, we'll buy later. And the moment she said, "Papa, we have become poor," she wanted to say that and she was very young. She was just about 4 years old, and that pinched me. That really pinched me, Is it something which I am trying to do it for myself, right? Is that family not important to me, or it's only Sundeep Talwar, right? And that moment I decided, I think this is something which I should not be doing further, right? Because while there are successes in life, there are failures in life, there are anything more learnings which come out of the success and failures. It is the experience of struggle and hardships which create great leaders, and that was the moment where I decided, I think I need to take another stand and probably live for the family than living for myself, So I think this is a big learning as a leader, and I'm sure most of you would have faced it in your life, where you have to take a call whether it is you or your family, it is you or your friends, So that's a good question which one has it. So anything more learnings, but the important thing in life is what is the joy, what is the satisfaction you're getting in your life. So I continued thereafter with the corporate career, thanks to Mr. Mittal, who, because I was there in ATL earlier, who continued to bring me back. And I went to Africa thereafter. And then I came back to a long career after almost like 14 years thereafter in the corporate career. I was posted in Jammu Kashmir, and you guys know how Kashmir is, right? Kashmir can close any day, and tough times. And I fairly recall being the CEO of the organization you posted there, having a tough time, and you're locked in the house for a good amount of 10 days, right? This was the 8th day. And unfortunately, I'm a vegetarian, nothing at home. So my cook told me, "Sir, what do you want to eat?" I said, "Bhaiya, we nothing have at home. You only make one meal for me. And being a hardcore Punjabi, I said, "Paranthe bana de yaar. That'll be the best. That'll fill my tummy. I'll be happy." So by about noon time, he served paranthas to me, right? Well stuffed, nice paranthas. So I was very happy. Chalo yaar, the day will go good. And by 4 o'clock, I had pain in my stomach. So a lot of stomachache. And I went to him and I asked him, "Bhaiya, what did you cook here?" So he said, "Sir, maroge to nahi?" I said, "Kyun? Daantoge to nahi?" I said, "Kyun?" He said, "Sir, no vegetables were available. So there was some grass outside, and I boiled the grass and I stuffed the paratha, and you had the paratha." So I can see behind Dr. Krithi, there's a picture. Tigers don't eat grass, right? So that's the moment I realized, if having everything in life, I could not satisfy my hunger. Look at the millions of children and millions of people who sleep hungry every day. And that's where I started searching for an organization where I could contribute to the fullest of my potential. And nothing better than Akshay Patra, who serves 18 lakhs children every day in the government schools. And the journey is big. And I'm very satisfied I joined this organization. It's one of the world's largest school meal program organization today. As Indians, we are proud that we have the largest kitchen in Hubli. And what best than spending time with children? So my family does not have only 2 children now. I have 18 lakh children, which I work with them and spend time with them every day.
Thank you so much, Sandeep. Thank you for sharing that also. I think it, it reminds me of this thing when it comes to failure, where we need to sort of zoom out as well and think about the circumstances, think about the other things that are contributing to these challenges, and and sort of to internalize some of those learnings so that we can do better the next time around. And what you said also, about deciding to kind of shut down the business at that time, I think it's also about how we frame things, right? Because you could look at it and say, oh, he had this idea and it didn't work out. Or you could look at it as like great leadership decision making, because you recognize at a certain point that this wasn't going to be the path for you. And you kind of, rather than challowing it for, for longer, you kind of made that difficult call. So thank you so much for sharing that.
My pleasure.
Shruti, I'd like to come to you now. Your industry has been, everyone knows how badly hit it was throughout the pandemic, and your organization has survived. When we were speaking earlier this week, you were talking about these, things that you did over the course of the pandemic that allowed you to survive, allowed you to adapt. And how you were kind of very agile in making those changes, including hiring people and so on and so forth. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how you handled basically everything shutting down, right, in the hospitality space. And now you're thriving. So please tell us what you did and how.
Hi. So firstly, thank you so much for having me. Shiksha Lokam is extremely close to my heart. So it's an absolute pleasure to be here. And of course, Krithi is a good friend. So I'm happy to be on this panel with her as well. It's been an interesting 2 years. And in fact, I'm in Trivandrum right now at our hotel, which was launched 3 months before the pandemic started. This is our largest hotel yet. The number of rooms we have is equivalent to all of our other rooms combined. So it was, coming into the pandemic, you can just imagine kind of the shock, right? Because a hotel typically takes 6 months to a year to sort of settle in. We had 3 months and then the pandemic hit. And, we employ, now we employ about 800 people. At the time we had a little bit less, but you can imagine, the hospitality industry was incredibly shaken up with the pandemic, and people were in absolute fear because most of the industry was just letting go of everyone that they had. Everyone was sort of just trimming. And so people were just incredibly frightened, right, for their sort of well-being and their future. One of the things that really helped us in the decision-making that we sort of, we made eventually with all the decisions that we made was that we were very clear about our value system. We knew that we were a people-centric organization and that we were going to somehow get through this. So one of the first things we did was assess, not really knowing what the extent of the pandemic would be, was just sort of calculating, okay, if for a year we shut down, how much money would we need to keep things afloat? So just manage our fixed costs and keep people on the rolls. And so once we understood that number, then it was a matter of saying, okay, this is what it's going to take. We're going to go ahead, right? So based on that decision, and then based on this idea that, we were an organization that held our people together, we started slowly making the decisions that we needed to in order to survive. So, there were a few things that we did. Firstly, we looked at how do we reduce, optimize our costs, right? So absolutely, so many of our properties were shutting down. So just bring it down to the bare minimum expenses that were required to ensure that the buildings were maintained and managed. People were put into training. So every single person that was on the job who was now sitting at home was now put into training, so that the time that they were spending off the floor was actually still being, it was well utilized in some way or the other in terms of upgradation of their skills or otherwise. Another thing that we focused on was communication. We wanted to make sure that all of our internal communication channels were open so that people didn't feel that, this was the end of the world, which honestly for many it was a very traumatic time, apart from, of course, COVID having been traumatic, but people in the industry really, were quite traumatized by the things that were going on. So we made sure that the internal communication was very open. We made sure that people had access to mental health care, and whatever else they needed to support themselves during that time. And we also stayed engaged with our guests. That was another one of our priorities, to make sure that when business was back, which we knew eventually would come back, that we would be the first to open, we would be the first to receive our guests, and the first to sort of, and just make sure that our service was up to the mark and the expectation of the brand, as much as it was before. So these were the sort of the key things decisions we made early on. As a leader, I had been CEO for about 1.5 years at that point, and I had sort of just gotten my feet wet in a sense. And there were, at that point, I was also in the process of thinking about the kind of leadership team that I wanted. So similar to Krithi, I was pretty lonely in our organization as well. And so I had maybe, January, February, had started interviewing for VPs to come into the organization. And actually we hired a VP of operations in February. And he recently told me he joined on April 1st. And he was like, I didn't know if I had a job on April 1st. I wasn't sure because, of course, we didn't, of course, rescind it, but most people had, their offers were all the thing about it is that these are really passionate, high quality, and I think that is a little off. Can you hear me?
Yeah, maybe you can turn your video off if you're having trouble with the internet. And
sure, I can do that for a minute. So we got some great people, quality people coming in. And we were aggressive about it because, so many people were now available in the industry. And so we really went out and found these people of quality who also were very attracted, again, to our value system and the decision-making that that the decisions that we had made to not let go of people and to really stick to this value system. So it was a very enriching time, honestly. As difficult as the last 2 years have been, and really it has been tremendously difficult with the ups and downs and everything. I see that we really spent the time well, whether it was in investing in our people, investing in things like technology, which we had a little bit more time to think about during the pandemic, whether it was looking at processes and experiences. But yeah, at the end of the day, I feel like, my spin on it is that it was quite positive. Sorry about the internet.
No, what a great spin. To describe the last 2 years as enriching, I think is actually testament to probably what all you did, right, at Tamara. But I actually wanted to ask you, because as you were speaking, you were making a lot of these calls at a time of great uncertainty, right? I know you knew eventually the pandemic would end, but nobody really had a sense of what that horizon would look like. And as a leader, when there's so much pressure, you've just set up this hotel 3.5 months prior to the pandemic. How do you make some of those calls? And I'd actually like to ask you that, and also Krithi, because of Krithi, what you were saying with regards to all of the changes going on within the organization at a time of a lot of upheaval in general. So maybe Shruti, you can go first, and then Krithi next.
Sure. I think a bit of it is a calculated risk, right? It's you have to you have to understand what the risk is, honestly, in terms of what are you getting into, what could go wrong. And once you've done that, I think then you make the decision and you try to make the best of it. I think that we haven't, during the pandemic, I think thankfully, we haven't made many bad calls. I have to be honest. I don't think we've had many. I can't really off the top of my head think of anything that we really failed on. Maybe there were a few missed opportunities, but I know the reasoning for why we made those decisions, and I stick by it. So I think for us, it was just it was the idea of managing risk and saying that, okay, just understanding, right? If this for some reason really does turn south and we've done all of this, actually there was one mistake. All of the PPE, like all the purchases that we made in regards to COVID, like all the sanitization machines and everything like that, we bought them too early. And so the costs were very high. Actually, it was like 3 times the price of what it was like a month later. And unfortunately, that was something that we definitely messed up on. However, because we had the machines, we also were able to open business, the day that business was allowed to be opened. And so maybe not so much of a mistake either. But yeah, I mean, it's for us, it was about that. It was just understanding and saying, okay, we can absorb this if it goes south.
Krithi?
So I think I actually want to make a distinction between last year, 2020 and 2021. I think with 2020, it was, survival mode, having to make that tough call of letting a few people go. We have an amazing conservation education program called Wild Chalet, which goes into schools around wildlife parks and works with children who actually, see tigers and elephants and face conflict with these animals. And we had to put the entire program on hold, but we used the time to upskill our staff and got them really trained, right? Preparing for the fact that eventually schools will open. And just looking at, like Shruti said, what is it going to take to keep the remaining, because we had to let a few people go. This last year was very, very different. One, we had, in the middle of the pandemic, we started this community health and outreach program, because COVID-19 is a zoonotic disease that transmits between wildlife and people. So while we were on hold, we went and discovered that there are 6 more zoonotic diseases common to the Western Ghats, which most common rabies, everybody knows about it, but there's Casanur forest disease, crop typhus, leptospirosis. I'm not trying to scare you guys, but there are 6 other diseases, and very common transmission between livestock, people, and wildlife. And we launched this community health program, which went out, reached ASHA workers, Anganwadi workers, forest department workers. We did these day-long workshops, and with the idea of educating people about zoonotic diseases, transmissions. It's not just COVID. How do you stay safe with the other 5? What it did was build this incredible network of 2,000-3,000 doctors, nurses, ASHA workers who we could call. So when the second wave hit, but we'd been running the program for 6 months. We literally, 40 of us got on the phone and called everybody we knew, saying, what is the story in rural India? In urban India, it was about oxygen and oxygen concentrators and lack of hospital beds. In rural India, it was a very different story. It was no PPE, no IR thermometers, no basic dolo to manage and treat the disease, right? What we did was incredible, right? 40 people who are researchers, conservationists, educationists, all coming together. The entire org worked for 6 weeks, and we delivered COVID relief material to 610 primary health centers in Goa, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu. We got to the PHCs that nobody was getting to, because they're in the remote forests. You require a 4-wheel drive vehicle to go there. You need to cross monsoonal flooded rivers. And we did it. And one, it brought the team together. Second, it made us feel like we were doing something about the situation in India, and we were doing it in the places that nobody else was thinking about doing it in, right? And so I think it's a completely different story. We are a better org for doing this, even though our mission is for wildlife and wild places. We know that in a very short span of time, God forbid, something else happens again, CWS will jump in and help the most vulnerable Indians. And I'm very, very proud of that. So I think we have 2 very different stories. And I think that builds, one, grit and resilience in all of us. Second, the fact that you did something where it was needed, when it was needed most. So I think we're all much better for having jumped in rather than watch passively. So.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that. I think so many people in the social sector, I think if there's anything that we've recognized, is that when the crisis hits, we know that we can handle it, and then we can serve the communities we serve. I know Sundeep was saying that, last year you distributed, what was it, 3 billion meals, and you have done 2 billion in how many years of Akshaya Patra?
So absolutely. So Rashita, we served about 2 crore meals in the last 21 months. And I think not only that, we reached out to the deserving people, the length and breadth of the India, right away from the Kashmir to Kanyakumari. In fact, if you ask me, COVID has helped us or taught us many more, as Dr. Krithi talked about, many more ways to serve the deserving people. Right? I remember the day when we found the people walking on the streets and on the highways, and I had my patron donor Bata who came forward and helped us with sleepers overnight, and we could give them anything more shoes and sleepers so the people don't walk barefoot, right? Then I had the kind donors like Kinley and Pepsi who came forward to give millions of bottles of water, because the railway stations and bus stands, all the shops and outlets were closed, and there was no water for the children and families to have it, right? I remember my day when I met this young mother, with two little children. One was just about 2.5 years old, another was 6 years old, and you have to believe me that she was walking and walking and walking for a good amount of 30 hours before she reached out the Bangalore railway station. With nothing, all the three of them had it, right? Where she wanted to pick up a train to just see if she can probably move out. And that's where we started off ensuring that all railway stations and bus stands could have a packet, which could have a meal for the children and something which they could carry for maybe the next about 12 hours, including the ORS and all the things. Followed by a little survey in the month of the June. We reached out to our existing 18 lakh children, which we were feeding by the month of March of 2020, and found that 37% of the children had skipped breakfast, right? Close to about 52% of the children were not brushing their teeth. And close to about 86% of the girl child did not have sanitary napkins. This was alarming. And I'm only talking about the 18 lakh children which you were feeding. I don't even know how many more did not have this, right? And so we started off providing happiness kits to the people, now to the children. Now these happiness kits had groceries for the full month, including the biscuits for the morning breakfast for the children. It had hygiene kit, which included sanitary napkins, toothbrush, toothpaste, and soap. It had an education book, education book. It's kind of workbook we created for them. It had English, maths, and science as a subject for them. And we ensured that every point of time they complete a workbook, submit back to us, they get a kit the next month. So the learning cycle continued in parallel, taking care of their nutrition, hygiene for these children. So phenomenal work by our team on the operations on the ground by reaching the length and breadth of the India, and over 2 crore meals. Trust me, this is really big and a commendable job done by all the NGO partners which we associated with, and including our staff.
Thank you. Thank you. This actually brings up another question, which is that when you're operating at this kind of scale, right, and you're working with so many partners and very, very large field teams, as leaders, it becomes important to create a culture within the organization of learning, right? So that when things aren't working out, you can course correct, and that information is making its way up to either somebody at the level of a program head or even, someone like you. So I was just curious, when you think about building culture within your organization, how do you create a culture that that says mistakes are okay and we want to learn about them?
So over here, I would say that the core task or the primary task of the leader is to unlock the potential of others, right? And I'm sure you would agree. Leaders are most of the time bewildered by the fact that individuals cannot grasp the premise that they cannot do greater things, and most of the times I keep and I have a habit of watching people a lot. So I go, and we've realized that when you see the children playing, right, and while you can see a lot of energy in them, but on the parallel side, when you see them growing, you would find that one may grow becoming a scientist in the future, and another may not accomplish anything of significance. Now, what is the difference between the both, right? it's largely the environment around you and the experiential thing, which makes the entire difference. It could potentially be the butterfly effect from some small thing or the things that we change the course for sending them in different direction than one on the other, right? That's what I believe. That's the kind of culture we build in Akshay Patra, right? The culture where we ensure that every person is a leader. We are a very federated organization. While I sit in so-called the head office, but we don't call ourselves as the head office. We are the support office to our 60 kitchens or 14 states of India, right? Now, all of us over here continue to support the presidents and the operations heads to ensure they have a success in their life, right? So not limiting to the kitchens, we also ensure that we spend a lot amount of time mentoring our children in the schools. In fact, there's a very recent update on where I had Nazir, who was at one point of time part of the Hyderabad school. I met him, I think about 4 or 5 years ago, right? So he came to all the way from Hyderabad to meet us, right? So he gave he gave a letter to me and he shared that letter. I asked Nazir, what exactly is this? He says, sir, I appeared for the CA entrance exam and I cleared in the first attempt itself. And thanks to you and thanks to the finance head who had come from our Kandi Hyderabad kitchen, he just shared his story and I got so inspired by the story of that person that I went ahead and decided to become a chartered accountant. So now I want to become a leader. I want tomorrow to be the leader when I'm going to be a CFO of Akshay Patra.
That's great.
Right. So that is the culture we have in Akshay Patra, and we inculcate in all our 7,000 employees that you have to take ownership, because the ownership is the ground of ensuring that the child gets the meal at 11 o'clock every day.
Yeah.
It's the driver who has to ensure that he must ensure that the meal reaches out at 11 o'clock. So he's a leader. The route we don't use technology. He's a leader where he ensures that, which route he takes to ensure that he reaches out at the least amount of time.
But what happens if he doesn't? I mean, I know actually your efficiency is next level, but
yes. So 99.99% has been our efficiency in the last 22 decades now. We've been serving. So we do a lot of Six Sigma projects, and our efficiencies have been 99.99% where we reach. Yes, there are tough stages where we have, Dr. Krithi has talked about monsoons. So monsoons have been tough times, and that's where the leadership comes, So like the large vehicles don't come, and we have enough stories where they take cycle rickshaws. So they will probably call the people from the villages. They will probably ask them to pick up a cycle rickshaw and start driving the cycle rickshaw towards the school. Right. So that's a leadership decision. That's somewhere we are not dictating them to take a cycle rickshaw.
Right.
So that's a culture of ownership.
Yeah. So it's empowering your teams to be able to take the right decisions, to do their best, and creating a conducive environment for that.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Krithi, what would you have to say about how to create a learning culture within your organization?
I think I'm a very blunt person, and I pretty much tell people what I think, and trying to encourage everybody in the org to practice radical candor, because I think both the good and the bad, it's better to be spoken and solved rather than assume and guess and then do things differently, right? And I find that approach is actually working, because then it doesn't matter what your position in the organization is. If you're able to express what you want and what you think is right, you'll grow in the right ways, right? And you'll also stop doing things that are not working. Otherwise, it's 4 or 5 people at the top telling everybody else what to do. And I found that some of the most creative ideas come from people who are not at the top, right? And finally we had money to have an offsite, which I think in the corporate world is luxury, and they do it all the time, but NGOs don't do it. And we got people together, and it was extraordinary, bringing 30-40 people together in one place and spending 3 days as human beings, and letting go of the work, and just and these are, I think the culture comes from that. We work in extraordinarily stressful conditions, whether it's walking in the forest to look at elephants and tigers, and then running risks that come with walking in the forest, whether it's working with really, really marginalized communities on the edges of these parks who are extremely poor, have almost no access to healthcare and education. And all of this can bring on enormous stress. And we've been, I find that a lot of us just internalize this, and you don't express it, and you just carry it saying it's okay, we'll just keep going, we'll just keep going. And I think it's important to give those avenues for those releases and create those kind of spaces where that can happen. We don't do that enough. And lastly, for me, wildlife is and was for a very long time a male dominated field. If you look at my dad's generation, I would say 95-99% of people were male. Today, it's very different. If you look at master's programs, it's 60% women going to get degrees in environmental science and wildlife biology. But I was very lucky. I grew up in a house where my parents pretty much said, do what you want, find a passion in life, right? But I look at a lot of women in the field, they have fought extraordinary amounts to get where they are, to even be able to become a wildlife scientist or conservationist. And I think a conscious effort to uplift those people is something we are trying to work on and do more with, both men and women, but particularly even more so in women, because I mean, we have parents calling us saying, I don't know if I should send my daughter walking into, Doni forest or Nilambur forest. What happens if an elephant comes, right? So the level of risk is not something most people get, but the passion is also there, and it is to kind of balance the two.
Thank you. And I love that radical candor. I mean, it's one is leading by example, but I think it's also such an easy way to then think about just talking openly, right? About everything from what's not working, what you're concerned about, and so on. So I know we're almost at time, and I would like to take some questions as well. So maybe we can just move on to that. There is a question from Aditi Rao, and this is for you, Krithi. We all know the destruction is inevitable, and the loss we have caused to the environment cannot be reversed. It's a sad thing. But how to keep going in this field, in the field of wildlife conservation, without feeling that we're working for a lost cause? How do we feel motivated?
So I always tell people, like, we lose 9 out of 10 times, right? This is the reality of working in wildlife and broadly the environment field. But there is that one win that occasionally comes along, which gives you the lift and the push to keep going, right? And I've seen that with some of our work at CWS, little things that we've done have had massive impacts on improving people's life with human wildlife conflict, or providing opportunities through tourism, those kind of things, right? It is to keep looking for those opportunities. And I think as a field, we've been very inward looking. We don't collaborate with people from other sectors. And I think whether it's the education space or the health space or other spaces, we have a lot to learn. And I hope we start to see more of those cross collaborations, because in our work, we use other disciplines, and we don't seem to want to work with people who have expertise in health and who have expertise in education. And I think we need to start to push for not within sector, but cross sector collaborations at this point.
Absolutely. I just want to pause and see if there are any more questions that anyone would like to ask, if you haven't typed it out already. Yes, okay, there's one more for Sundeep. Have you ever faced failure or unexpected negative consequences while working with the government? If yes, how have you handled it? Considering working with the government is a high-risk environment that may have little tolerance for failures by those outside the system. It's a great question.
It's a tough question. That you must compliment the person who has asked it. Well, yes. So working with government is tough, no denials about it. But there is a joy of working with the government, because what you're trying to do as a public-private partnership is trying to multiply the impact of the program on the ground, right? So, in fact, I recall what Rajiv Gandhi used to say at one point of time when I was a child, when I heard him: for every 1 rupee which is being tend to be for the beneficiary, while it reaches out to the end person, it translates to only 10 paisa, right? Now, the benefit of being Akshay Patra and working with the government is that when the government gives us 1 rupee, we multiply by that 3, and that's where the beneficiary gets an impact of 3 rupees of it. So it's a 3x factor, right? So as an organization, I think it's very, very important, and especially non-for-profit, it's very important when you work with the government, right? You write on a very thin line. I would say you are on a razor line, and you probably have to ensure that efficiencies in your processes, efficiencies in your project has to be delivered to the team, right? In fact, I keep telling openly, that while we are a non-for-profit, and we're supposed to get subsidies much in time, but there's always a delay of anything less than six months to us. How do you expect an NGO to run with an outstanding of anything between 50 to 70 crores at any point of time from the state or central government, right? But yes, we are thankful to them, all of them, to get this program going. But then let me tell you, it's very difficult. It's very, very challenging, especially in the food sector.
We have one more question for you. What are the most important decisions you make as a leader of your organization?
Well, I take care of sustainability and the brand of the organization. I think one of the most important decisions for me is ensuring there is enough liquidity for the organization, and parallelly, you are at the lowest income expense ratio, because I think one of the most important factors in the CSR industries, are you trying to maintain within the 5% administrative expense? So yes, and as head of the brand or marketing, you have to ensure that you reach out to the last mile at the least amount of cost. And that's what is one of the difficult decisions I probably take every point of time with my team. And they hate me at times to tell them no.
Part of being a leader. Great. I don't see any more questions. Oh, I'm sorry. There is one more from Aishwarya, and then maybe we can close after that, because I know we're a little over time. This is from Aishwarya. Could you please share one happy aha moment as a leader that you have had during the pandemic? And this is to all panelists, so it's actually a great note to end the session on as well. So Shruti, maybe you can start, and then Sundeep, and then Krithi.
It's a hard question, though. I need a minute. I think, one of the, so actually, I think the biggest, aha moment for me was after the first lockdown, and maybe it was after the second one even, somebody wrote to me, and that person had been a guest at one of our properties a few days earlier. And they wrote to me saying, your team spoke so highly about your leadership, and the fact they were so grateful for the fact that you took care of them during the pandemic, right? And during all of these lockdowns. Like one of our properties was shut for 5 months in 2020. So, it's a great thing, because it wasn't solicited. It wasn't, there was nothing behind it. It was just goodwill. And so for my team to sort of show that appreciation, and to somebody that had nothing to do with me, really, that made me feel really nice. I mean, it feels really proud, right? As a leader, to hear that kind of, that feedback. And I think that what that kind of attitude within my team has led to is the fact that our guests have been really happy, since since and after that time. And so it's it's a very positive feeling to know that some of the things that you do are resulting in good things. I always say the hospitality industry like, it's like instant gratification because you sense joy, right? We kind of create these joyful experiences for people. And so after such difficult times, when you hear, small nugget like that, you get a lot of joy.
Sundeep?
Yeah, thanks. I think during this time I have interacted with some hundreds of beneficiaries. But I remember recently when we're doing a COVID vaccination camp in Delhi. So I met this old lady who came on a wheelchair, and she was 87-year-old, barely about to walk. And the moment we got her inside the school, because that is where we do the vaccinations for the people, right? So we gave her an experience or just ensuring she comes, we do her registration, and she got her vaccination, everything in less than 10 minutes. The first thing said that I want to meet the young tall guy. हिंदी में बोला उसने, वो जो गोरा सा लंबा सा है ना, उसे मुझे मिलना है, मुझे उससे बात करना है, मुझे उसे हक करना है. So that was a moment. And so many hundreds of people were there in the volunteers just because I was at the gate to give her that experience. कि भैया उनको आने दो पहले, बाद में कोई और आएगा. And how did she recall that? And then she blessed me and she hugged me. One of the best moment of my life. And I trust me that if still you can see tears in my eyes. That sari, she was almost, there were hardly any clothes on her body, just trying to cover up with whatever little pieces. At that point of time, I was thinking, this is the greatest blessing I could ever had in my life. I still remember that to that, and there could be 100 more I can continue to share and talk about today.
Thank you, Sundeep. Krithi?
I think, when you run an organization, at least you're constantly weighing the risks and the benefits of implementing something. And particularly during COVID, there was so much psychological fear on catching it, and if you would die from it, if you get very sick. And consciously, we made the decision to run the Wild Suraksha program, where we would go out to these, run these day-long workshops and have, we couldn't have 50 people in a room, but we'd have 15, 20 people in our team there. And you're constantly wondering, is it worth it? Because you're also putting your team at risk, right? We had two incidents. One where, we talk about snakes and snake bites and what to do. And we had a situation where, we did a workshop, and literally we got a call the next day saying somebody in our village got bitten by a snake. If we hadn't attended the workshop, we'd have left that person to die, because there are only 4 venomous species of snakes. If you can identify those 4, you're fine. All the other snakes will not kill you, right? They knew to look for what kind of snake. They realized it's not a venomous snake. And they knew what kind of first aid to give. It's as simple things like that, right? Where, maybe we wouldn't have done the workshop, maybe that person would have gone. And then you multiply that effect by all the work you're doing and continuing to do during a pandemic. I think it's very, very gratifying that you can make that difference in people's lives, and you don't stop because things get hard, and you just keep going, right?
Thank you for sharing that, Krithi. Thank you, Sundeep. Thank you, Shruti, for taking the time to be on this panel today. It's been an incredible conversation. Neeraj, I will hand over to you.
Thank you, Rachita. I think you owe a good thank you to us. You really coordinated well. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. I think, this definitely was one of, the highs. I think each of you, Dr. Karanth, Sundeep, Shruti, just the diverse perspectives from 3 extremely different industries. I don't even want to call it industries. Wildlife, environment on one hand, hospitality on the other, and nutrition. But underlying for us, the idea of education itself, I think there's a lot for us to learn from these conversations, a lot for us to take back in terms of how we could think about leadership in education. But just the idea of trying every single day and trying with your team, I think that definitely, stood out. Again, this time was extremely small, very short. There's a lot that I'm sure me and the participants here would want to definitely hear. This and experiences from ground, from the different pieces, from the different aspects itself. So thank you so much for really bringing these key insights. And Rachita, thank you so much for making this conversation very lively, engaging, and extremely fruitful. Thank you so much to the entire panel here for taking time out.